Going back to the whole consortium thing, Marek spoke about the IBM and Maersk project, which was exciting to see. I think they signed up, I don't know, 100 partners or something for this. There were some rumbles that people were kind of hesitant to join just because who owned the IP in this project. The IP was shared, I think, between IBM and Maersk. Are you seeing a lot of this stuff as well? And is the IP really driving a problem to help people work together in a consortium?
Can I go first on that one? I think it is, comes back to, again, education and a shift in mindset. Right? This idea that collectively this consortium can realize, better cost savings and increased efficiency and so forth. But a lot of the time, I don't know, maybe you two can give your opinion on whether you've seen this or not, is when you approach CEOs, other executives and folks, and they have this barrier that they're like, why should I give up any of my data? Why should I share anything, right? If we're on a shared network, you can even see by the number of packets I'm putting onto the network, like what my general activity level is. And I think that, perhaps you can reflect on whether you've seen that too, or how you deal with that.
I've actually have experience as an engineer taking advantage of that situation. I mean, and I think everybody should assume that if you're revealing data to your competitors, if they're not looking at that, obviously there's a line of what's proper and what's not, but if they're not looking at it, they're not doing a good job. But the trade-off is access to this new environment, this new market that we're creating, this new ability to do things in a lot quicker manner. From putting on my legal hat for a second, and I promised that I wouldn't do this, but because we're talking about open source, which is one of my areas of specialty at the law firm, IP is something that it's one of my biggest issues dealing with clients, is that everybody just assumes public ledger technology is either open source or free, and I think that's scary to make that assumption. Certain things are open source. Blockchain has basically the creators gave away the IP, so everybody's able to use it for free. Ethereum, on the other hand, they've retained rights, and it's just open source. So if you make modifications to it, you need to know that your modifications are also open source, et cetera, et cetera. I've also heard horror stories of other tokens, other platforms that are not open source. So I think it's something that there needs to be some level of understanding for. Ideally, the consortium shares. We're lucky because we're a law firm and we have IP specialists, and this is something that we're very key on. You don't want to obviously give up your IP, but to make it available to everybody in the consortium, I think everybody still benefits. So 2 points. One, IP you want to share, data, maybe not, but be aware that if you do, someone should be using it, because that's kind of where we are as organizations use technology.
I completely agree with the IP part. And in terms of data sharing, it comes back to the choice of technology. So if you are okay sharing your data publicly, you go for something like Ethereum. If you are okay sharing your transactions within a network, you go for a private one. And it could be Quorum, it could be a private network using Ethereum. The situations where you do not want people to see your transaction data, who are the two transacting parties, what is the amount that is being transacted, that is when you go for Quorum. But in a situation where the number of transactions can give you a competitive edge within a network, you go for something like Hyperledger, where it is completely channelized and you cannot even see the transactions happening. So it comes down to the choice of technology when, choosing the right technology for the right problem. And then the second part is on the governance side of things. So whenever you need to, let's say you have created an agreement which is put into the smart contracts. And now that needs to be upgraded. What is the upgrade process? Can one person upgrade it? What are the governance around it? Is there a maker-checker process? Is there a multi-sig contract which requires approval from all the parties in the consortium before this change can happen? So the second one is more on the implementation side of things, and the first one is more from chalking out the use case and picking the right technology for the right problem.
You make a really, one quick note. You make a really great point about public versus private. One of the biggest issues that the legal industry has run into in regards to smart contracts is that they're all publicly available on Ethereum. I mean, if you're running a private chain, that's a different story. But that's one of the biggest changes. I mean, if you ask a lawyer for all the agreements that they write to publicize them, I mean, that lawyer's gonna, their jaw's gonna drop. That's not how we operate. So even there's some great, I think there's some opportunity, but the old way is so revered that it's hard to make that jump. And that leads us that slows the adoption down, that slows the product building. Because unfortunately, I mean, you can make so much money if you had access to other people's agreements. I mean, there's ways to do things to protect your client, et cetera, but it was an oddity that I always find quite funny. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Merrick.
Yeah, so we're sort of been talking at the application level, right? Assuming we already have the blockchain solved, we're all running nodes and all that stuff's working. Again, just because the technology is so new, we haven't necessarily been through like an upgrade cycle of the blockchain software itself, right? Let's say there's Hyperledger 3.0 comes out tomorrow, and they're like, stop using Hyperledger 1.0, it's horribly broken, right? How do we coordinate updating software on a distributed network, right? So we're seeing the pains in some of these public blockchains of different ideas of what constitutes an upgrade or not, individuals deciding which software they're going to run or not. And so, I wonder how it'll play out in a consortium or an industrial environment.
And then it goes against decentralization, because that's centralization. Yeah.
So I think network application governance, but network governance is a big challenge that people are trying to solve for. I guess it's tough enough to get people in the same room wanting to share data with each other, but
you know what, Matt? I mean, I would be excited to let's get something done first, right? Let's have that killer app, and then worry about how to upgrade it later. Maybe that's my inner hacker coming out, right? And I use hacker in the computer enthusiast sense, the classic sense, not the CNN criminal sense. I'm a good guy.
Yeah, so I guess it's a stepping stone that you get something developed and implemented, and then figure out the rest later. And governance is a big piece of that. Have any of you seen any challenges or have to overcome anything regarding governance and maintaining a system and updating it? Has that come across at all?
Yes, for sure. I mean, upgradable smart contracts is something that I'm working on right now. And it is very challenging because there are ways to achieve it, but from now I'll be speaking like completely about technology, and Merrick is smiling here. There are complications with technology, like there's a limit to the byte size, to the bytecode size which you can store on Ethereum. And if you are creating these upgradable smart contracts, you need to keep a track of the previous data. You cannot, let's say in my example, one of my projects, they have 2 million transactions in a day. And if I have to, let's say, upgrade the smart contracts after a month, I'll have 2 million into 30 transactions, which I will have to re-ingest on the smart contract, which is a lot of effort for me. So I need to have a track or an ability to have access to this previous data, even though when I'm upgrading these contracts. So it is very complex, but we have been able to achieve it. There are ways to achieve it. The only thing that is needed is a lot of imagination in terms of optimization, which we are not used to anymore, because for a very long time, we've had unlimited amount of data, we've had unlimited amount of storage, and it was all fine. And now suddenly we have this problem that we can only store so much. We can only execute so many operations. So so a lot of optimization that you have to do is something challenging, but achievable.
Thank you. So yeah, we're out of respect of time. I think we'll cut the discussion here. Thank you guys so much. That was an amazing discussion. I think we could go all day. So thank you very much for doing this today. I think, sorry guys, just but before we head out, just want to make sure if anyone has any questions or would like to ask anything, we could just open the floor a few minutes to any questions. So.
Thanks for the panel, guys. I just wanted to understand more about kind of like, are we overhyped on the technology versus the solution? So an example would be, for example, you said you're building a royalty application. Wouldn't something like that be possibly easier to also build the traditional technical architecture? So why blockchain? Are we trying to fish a technology for a solution, or there's real use case for it?
Yeah. So you can do it. It's not that you cannot do it with other technologies. The problem is that it is point to point. And now where the economy is, it's not linear anymore. The business model is not linear. Party A to party B to party C. It's a complex web. And if you're going to have these point-to-point communications with each of them, you again have the problem of reconciliation and then audit. Sharing the same ledger allows you to remove all of that. You don't need to do your reconciliation. You don't need to do audit. You have the same time visibility. People get confused that blockchain is real-time visibility. No, it might not be real-time, but it is same-time visibility. All the networks, based on the authorization and rules, of course, all the participants in the network will be able to see same information at the same time. And think, in my example, think for Microsoft. They are working with multiple partners, EA Sports, Ubisoft, and like 20 different partners in different regions. If they have to maintain these networks or this traditional database system from point to point, they have a complex web of these point-to-point communications which they have to manage, and then they have to, imagine talking about analytics. If they have to perform analytics on the sales, they have to do it across all of these databases. It's a very complex web which you're solving by just putting everything on the same blockchain. So does that answer your question?
Just to add that, it's funny. I always think this as well. Like, well, because I grew up in the world of databases, relational databases. Like they do everything. But if you look at blockchain as a framework, and completely agreeing with your point, it offers other benefits, and it also offers the ability to scale. So even if right now you need something internal, if you've got a large organization like Microsoft, who is always looking to monetize every single one of their systems, you've now gained the ability to go to expose it publicly in the future at a minimal cost versus taking an existing system that wasn't built on the blockchain. So I mean, there are some benefits, but I think it should be part of anybody's analysis. It's almost like make versus buy, and if you're going to make, blockchain versus,
This is a personal strategy we follow at EY, is to promote public blockchains, because that's where we see the economy is moving towards a shared economy and a more public economy. You might have private networks today, but you can deploy the same smart contracts in a public network tomorrow. So having that sort of a long-term strategy.
I think to add to that, there's a lot of industries today that you'd really be surprised in how they operate under the hood. There's still some industries that are running on paper, right? So I think they would just benefit from a digital transformation story to begin with. Moreover, I think that a lot of thinking is, hey, you know what? Maybe while we're doing that, let's future-proof it a little bit so that if comes around that we're in a more collaborative stance, 5 or 10 years down the line, that we can apply those same cryptographic primitives, and we sort of talked about blockchain as a framework, right? Apply that and sort of build it out from there instead of being a closed silo that ends up being like more of a data crypt.
We have a typewriter on every single floor here. As much as Fasken is so invested into innovation, we're an old organization. There's a lot of resistance, but I shouldn't go further because I'll scare everybody. But
just for time consideration, we have time for one more question. Anyone else afterwards? Folks are going to be here, so feel free to come up. Gentleman over here.
Thank you. My name is Alex Panov, and my question to you is, can we use blockchain to make governments more effective? Is there a use case there?
I actually just got back from Paris, France, where there was a number of blockchain-related conferences, and I think the general feeling is potentially yes. I mean, right now, in terms of improving the situation marginally, if you will, a lot of governments these days are facing crisis, if you will, of legitimacy and this sort of stuff. So I think that blockchain, and many have said that blockchain is not ideal for voting. I think that it could be valuable for at least accountability. And interestingly, somebody said in France that there they call the law le code, like the code, right? And there's the expression blockchain. What's that expression? Code is law, right? So somebody mentioned that.
I'd give a more concrete example of one of the use cases that can be there in governments is finance management, public finance management. So let's consider an example of the Canadian government. The Central Budget Authority, they pass a budget to achieve certain KPIs or certain outcomes at the end of the year. And they do that through different ministries. and these ministries reach out to different contractors, and which again reach out to some other subcontractors to deliver those services. Like Ministry of Education would reach out to Treasury, Toronto School Board, Toronto TDSB, Toronto District School Board, and Toronto District School Board will finally be doing, implementing, like taking the money from the government and spending it, let's say, in buying books or pens or whatever, or doing some innovative coaching classes and ensuring certain KPIs that so many students have English above 80% at the end of the year. So for the government to spend out that money, and for them to see the KPIs, it takes 1.5 years to reconcile that kind of information. Because from Central Budget Authority, it goes to Ministry. Ministry is going to keep some part for them, for their administrative cost. Then they're going to give it to different contractors. And these contractors are going to reach out to different subcontractors, which would be working with multiple ministries, not just Ministry of Education. And the moment the money leaves from the ministry's account, it leaves the government's books. You don't know how to track the money from in the contractor's books anymore. So having that sort of a transaction on blockchain, this was in fact my first project when I joined EY, and I've implemented it. That's why I know about it. Having that sort of a visibility where you can see every time a contractor is spending money, they have to associate it with the KPI that they have achieved out of it. And with that, the CBA will have near real-time visibility into the KPIs, and they do not have to wait for 1.5 years to reconcile and to make decisions like whether I should pay so much money to this contractor. They're not doing good work, or this is the one who's doing great work, let me increase the budget here. So making those kind of effective decisions. So that's one of the use cases.
If you're speaking from the point of view of a citizen wanting access to information that the government's doing, I think transparency is always ideal, and we want to know more about what the government's doing. I think you run into an issue, though, in that in order to truly design that system properly, you'd need adverse parties to hold that data. Because unfortunately, government actors, and not really speaking of Canada, but governments across the world, they'd be actors to modify the data. Like that's like the one use case where if you had a repressive regime, they might actually go in and be like, well, let's actually change the past a little. So in order to do that correctly, you'd have to figure out an adverse network. And I wouldn't know how to do that. So I think...
Regarding the Ether fork?
No, I just mean like I can't imagine. So if the government of Canada starts releasing information on Ethereum, who's going to pay for it? They're not. They're not going to spend any money. So we'd have to create a system in some way. It might be tokenless, where this information is available, but then you also want to take the power out of their hands. They provide it with the information, but they don't represent those nodes, so they can't modify them. So I think there's some design challenges. I think it'd be fantastic. I mean, if you could solve it, it's $1 billion idea. But yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, the folks will be staying around if you have any other questions for the next half hour or so. So thank you once again. It's a fantastic conversation.